So as what Robert kindly mentioned before, my background is a bit of IT, originally electronics, and sort of merged into IT over the last 20 years, and probably the last 10, 15 years been playing with various applications, including ball charts and a couple of others, and have some interest as a part-time trader. And yes, so it's a fun journey in life. Anyway, back to the presentation. So I'm here to talk about APIs and putting data into Excel spreadsheets. This all started as a result of a couple of bull chart members wanting to pull end-of-day data or even data into their spreadsheets for accounting purposes, for purposes that suit their needs in order to keep their bookwork up to date, for managing their trades and so on. So in pulling in data, I decided to research this myself. Now, at that time, this is about 3 or 4 months ago, I wasn't a big Excel user. I've used it in the past, but I only use it as a need-to-know basis. So I went down the journey of actually working out how to pull in data from various websites. So we came across websites like this one here, which I've highlighted, and I'll put into a screen, into a browser, browse it up. And it became quite complex in pulling in data when you go to a site like this. And even though you can pull in data by using what they call screen scraping, it can be quite tedious and messy. You can actually write code to actually, for example, excuse advertising, you can actually write in code to put in, for example, codes in, for example, and actually get the data pulled into this website here, which then you can use Excel to pull the data from. Long story short, that was too hard. So I went down the path of looking at APIs. In my research of APIs, I came across some information on a blog which showed that the ASX website actually make information available using an API. So if you wonder what an API actually is, I'll keep it really simple. An API, in simple sense, is just an application that runs either on a computer or some system that's hosted out, in this case, on the internet. So it's an application program interface. And in this case, we are using it over the internet using HTTP. So when you make a call to an API that is exposed in the standard nowadays of the data returned is actually in something like JSON or HTML. In this case, we're using a browser, so I'll highlight this section here. So over here, we've got these particular clients, and these are the methods that we are familiar with when we use our web browser. And this is the service. In this case, we are going to be using the service provided by the ASX. So I mentioned before that when we make a call to an API, the information gets presented to us in simple text. And as I mentioned, the standard nowadays is what they call JSON, which I think it stands for JavaScript. I think it's Open Notation for memory. So in looking at raw data, what I'll do is I'll just go through. Just okay, clear that. We'll clear that. Erase the drawings. Cool. Okay, so what I've got here is the ASX website. So unknown to us, if we go to the ASX website, let's cut that out and go to the ASX website. It looks like the typical website, but with a bit of information, we can actually go through and append our wonderful bit of extra lines here, and we get this information here. So what we are looking at is a API that is exposed by the ASX, and they represented the data to us in what they call JSON format, which is sort of tidy key pair value of information. In this case, we're looking at BHP. I can change these to, for example, CBA, and then CBA's data, end of day, last traded, and so on and so on, and various other metrics or technical data on that stock. So as mentioned before, this is an XML format. Some services or APIs that are out there also provide information in a XML format, And to keep it really simple and short, when we look at the two pieces of information in comparison, I'll just show you very quickly so you're aware what goes on here. JSON is the way things are nowadays. So it's nice and tidy. This is a text editor. It's the same information being displayed, showing exchange rates, but the same JSON format. And this is a sample of XML, which is quite chunky and very difficult to work with. Fortunately, nowadays, most APIs provide JSON format data as return data. So we have now an API available to us. We can pass to it ticker codes. And my next challenge was to get this information into an Excel spreadsheet. So is everyone keeping track, I hope? I assume silent is yes.
Yep.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good. All right. So as a simple example, I decided to put some VBA code on an Excel spreadsheet. So we have here my wonderful simple Excel spreadsheet. Now this can be adapted to one's requirements depending on where their data is and what cells contain their ticket data and so on. But this is purely for a case of a simple example. So what we are looking at is ticker codes, and at the moment these columns are empty, and we've got a button here which I've set up. If I go through and hopefully click on that, I can go through and populate this information, which is being extracted live from the ASX website. So if I type in, well, I suppose A2 Milk, where's A2 Milk? I'll put in CBA's first line, show them on the same page. I'll go back in, type in CBA, more data. CBA, last price 69, close price was, where are we, close price, last price was 69.4, so hopefully I'm on the spreadsheet. 69.4, there you go, yeah, there it is, yeah, so it's obviously it's real, it's all there. Okay, so behind the scenes, what's actually going on? So in Excel spreadsheet, in Excel, for this to work, you need to set up or enable developer mode if you want to make any changes to this. So I can show what's required to set Excel in developer mode. Basically, go over here, you go to File, you go to Options, hopefully, and down under Customize ribbon. At the bottom here, this little checkbox here called Developer. By default, when you first install Excel, that's been disabled because most general users don't use the development side of Excel. In this case, we want it enabled, so that's the way it is. Okay, so we've got that enabled. This is an Excel spreadsheet. Behind the scenes, we have Developer tab, and we have the Visual Basic code. Now, with that being too technical here, this is the VBA code. I don't know if you guys out there are familiar with VBA, but in this example here, this is a simple example. All this stuff here in green are purely just comments for documentation. And I can make this available and hopefully document it more so it's easier to work with. Here we have just some variables that are being set and so on. So the cost of the work, and I've gone through various iterations of this to keep it nice and simple, the cost of the work is pretty much here, and I'm happy to have questions later, by the way, for some clarification. Basically, the cost of work is here where we have our cell being selected. In this case, my sheet is called Sheet 1. If I go back to Excel, it's called Sheet 1, which is down the bottom there. But that's Sheet 1, and we're actually selecting that sheet, and we're selecting the cell where the first ticker code resides. So as documented here, name of the active cell, and the starting cell with the ticker code in the active sheet above. So all we're doing in this example here, all this work here, is just doing a loop until we hit the empty cell, an empty row. In this case, an empty cell within that row there. So when the code runs, it starts off with row 2, because this row has columns, has titles. We're doing row 2 and working our way through these various ticker codes. As we work through those ticker codes, we are running through this loop here. And the point that we make the call to the ASX website in this case is here, where we are forming the URI for the GET, and we are appending the code, which is being initially selected from here. So if the active cell is the first cell, so we'll be started from A2, first cell. We go through, we form the URI as shown here, and then we go through and we, small window, sorry, go through and get the first, make the first call, get the information, and I've just gone through and selected a number of keys or key value pairs from that, from this data here, for example, CBA. I've gone through the open and the close prices. So these are key value pairs, so delimited by this column. But being JSON, it's all in the standard, and therefore makes it easy to work with. And because of that standard, the code is very easy to work with because we've loaded a module within Excel to make it easy to read JSON responses. So in this example here, I've gone through and deserialize, basically break up any information so we can access information such as your last price, past trade date, volumes, and so forth. And we can change these as we see fit. So we have a simple do loop until the end, and within the do loop, we are making a call to the ASX website. We deserialize that information. If the format is according to the JSON standard and nothing is empty, then we go through and pull the data out of the various keys and populate the cell on that active row relative to where the ticker price is. So hence why I've got here, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's populating from the actual cells relative to where the ticker price is. And this can all be changed based on one's requirements for their Excel spreadsheet. That's pretty much the code for that. I'm going to take some questions later or now, depends on how people feel. So that's pretty much overall how the program works. So once I got this working, that's all very great, and other members of Bullcharts and other colleagues have been using this in various forms. So my next challenge with this was actually going through where I had another problem. This is my notes here. I had another situation where I needed to pull data into a spreadsheet because I trade also US currency through CommSec. Their platform keeps has information in the currency that it is traded, in this case US dollars. So I needed to apply the same system in pulling in data for exchange rates. So what I did was simply replicated this code, or effectively this Excel worksheet, and replaced this information here with the information from my account, which is real data, which you'll get to see in a minute, and effectively modified this code accordingly, which you will see, which I will show now. So what I did was, I'll just go through and start this up. I'll pull it in. So that is, okay. Okay, this is another spreadsheet. I'll close this one off for now. Don't save. Cool. Okay, this is using the same method of an API on an external website. I needed to find another service provider like the ASX who were able to provide live or exchange rate data. Obviously, ASX don't provide that. While I'm talking about this particular service provider by ASX, I actually called them a few months back asking if more information about this or if any other services were available. And as it turns out, the people that I spoke to at the time didn't seem to know anything about this service being exposed, which I found quite bizarre, but I didn't say too much, left it at that, and nothing's changed, and it's still available up and running. So this takes all of the ticker codes. I haven't tried Extrao actually. I'll try this. It works. Okay, it's pretty much must be all normal differ codes, I'm guessing. It works with. There you go. Okay, back to the topic. I need to find another service provider for exchange rates. So on the internet, what I ended up doing was hunting around, and I found this crowd here called openexchangerate.org. Now, these are a free service provider, but with that, you have to register. And in order to use their service, they give you an app ID key, which is a unique key tied to your email address to actually use their service. So because my second problem I needed to work with was I had my data here that I needed to populate this column here in the local Australian currency, as these currencies here were in US. And my lovely accountant wanted to know the equivalent Australian currency on these given dates, so he can do his bookwork for my end of financial year for my self-managed fund. So I mentioned before, I found this lovely service provider. These guys here were able to provide that service. Again, I'm copying this into a simple browser. I'll start a new browser, and because I've already registered, so I'll do this because I hadn't registered previously. I'll just take that out there. It's going to complain that I need to be registered, I'm guessing. I haven't tried this. Yeah, missing app ID. So this is another API. In this case, unlike the ASX, I need to provide the an app ID which they provided themselves. So I want to go through and do this, and there's that data. This is the exchange rate for today, with the base currency, the USD, US dollars, and these are the other relative currencies. In this case, I was interested in the Australian dollar for, not for today, but for other dates. So going to these service providers, a bit of background work. I'm just going to go to the people themselves. They actually have documentation on who they are and what they do and how to get access and so forth. And to get your app ID, you go through this process and go through and register. Either you pay for a service, or if it's free, you can get a free service up to, I think, $1,000 a month. There it is. Free plan, $1,000 a month base currency, and so on. So once I hit $1,000 per month, I'll be asked to pay these relative fees. Anyway, back to the documentation for this. With the documentation, which you can research yourselves actually, I found out that I can actually get exchange rate data based on a given date. So for that, it looks something like this. So this is the same service provider. And in this case here, we have got a date of the this year, March, 2nd of March, based on these parameters here. If that makes sense, with my same app ID. So as mentioned before, I'll copy that and put that into a browser as I had before. We end up with the exchange rates with the USD based currency, and these are the relative currencies. So my mission was to go through my spreadsheet of this guy here and get the current price for, well, get current price, it's not correctly worded, but get the actual exchange rate for these particular dates. So my code looked something to what was similar, which is this one here. Yep, this is it. So very similar layout. We've got declaration of variables. Again, I've got the loop statement, basically. A bit different. Obviously, we're now using the open exchange rates, historical. I've got some code that I'm looking for. Well, especially the date, I've kept the same format code, which is getting the actual date from the particular cell. In this case, I've got the date. So I'm actually trolling through each row, getting the date, transforming the date into the format accepted by the API on that site, and getting the exchange rate and modifying the exchange rate with the net amount as per this line here. I can find it. There it is. And I'm rounding it down to 2 decimal places. But in summary, to keep it simple, this is my loop. I read the date, transfer the date to this format accepted by the API, go through and form the URI, provide my app ID, which is set up here somewhere. That's my app ID, and that's a currency I'm looking for, which is somewhere here. Currency here. And then I go through and make a call and deserialize it, and all I'm interested in is in the Australian currency, and I go through and multiply the amount, offset it to 2 decimal points, and the result is something like this. So if I go through and push my magic button, it's going to go through and make the call, and there's the end result. So it's just effectively calculating the actual Australian currency on those dates for these transactions. There are other service providers out there, so I've gone through and covered this. There are other service providers out there, which I am also looking into. There's a service provider which is someone like, I'm trying to find where they are actually. This guy here, this is another service provider who provides free APIs for currency feeds and so forth. Again, in your spare time, or those that are interested, you can go through and apply for a free API key and check the documentation and their examples on how to go through and use their APIs and so on. That pretty much summarizes how I've been able to pull data into an Excel spreadsheet through an API. I'm open for questions. Does anybody have any questions at this stage?
The only comment I've got is, Rick, I'm extremely impressed with your computer ability and knowledge. So could you get current, no, that's the word I'm going to use, live data using this from a provider, updating all the day?
You can, yes. You should. Will you be able to? Yes. It's just a matter of programming. So if I go through and pull up. By the way, who's asking the question? Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
David.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thanks, David. Sorry, I wanted to talk to you. Yeah. So if I open up the other simpler one, open up, close this. This is probably a bit simpler to work with, but yes. And I mean, if I was to move that code to another cell or another worksheet, it's a simple case of just modifying the code. And where is my developer gone? Stacey? Okay, yeah. So to answer your question, yes. So a service provider like this crowd here, for example, Alpha, these guys here, they would provide data. There are service providers out there. I haven't gone through and researched in detail who they are, but if need be, I can provide some information on that. To get the data in, all they would provide to you is for some sort of API key, which identifies who you are, and to track your transactions in case there's any cost associated with that, and a matter of actually making the VBA code work according to your layout of the Excel spreadsheet.
Yep.
So in terms
very
of
powerful.
yeah, very powerful. But I mean, for me, I went through this journey only because I had, like a few others, that I wanted to get a snapshot to say end of week how my trades were going, and wanted to document each end of week on a separate sheet, for example. So instead of having to manually enter the data for each of my active trades, I would have went through this process to simply populate that information. Just quickly, going back to the ASX, again, it's not documented, but if you put up the data, for example, for BHP, there's obviously a superset of information that's available, which is like open price and high lows and so on. But if I open up some of the not so larger entities, there's less information. Whereas if I open up someone like CBA, there's more information available. So it depends on the service provider and what information they're exposed to, what you can put into your Excel spreadsheet. I can make this Excel spreadsheet available. I can add some more comments to this so that it's easy to work with. I could probably change this around a bit so that it would be easier for those who need to read information from one sheet, for example, in a workbook, and move that or put the results to a separate sheet. That's possible too. It's a matter of actually just coding it accordingly. So that pretty much sums up my presentation on APIs and getting or pulling data into an Excel spreadsheet. Thank you for your time. Open for questions, though.
Rick, very good.
Rick, it's Michael.
Go, Michael.
It's Michael Lee.
Yep.
Rick, could you just show me again how you go to the ASX site to get that
Sure.
the data up?
So all we're doing is, as I mentioned in this example, the API is hosted on a web server like the internet, or all the information out there on the internet generally runs through HTTP or HTTPS protocol. In this case, they expose a service which is running on this endpoint. If I do that, it says you are not fine, it's unable to define API service call. I have to put a ticket code in there. So all I'm doing here is basically putting in the ticket codes for in the ASX. So if I put in a code like, I think of a code offhand, Woolies, WOL, is it Woolies? I can't remember. No, what's Woolies?
WOW.
Wow. WOW,
yeah, for example, yeah. So, so pretty much the information is available there. So as mentioned before, I'm not too sure. The people I spoke to at ASX, when I stumbled across this, I spoke to somebody in one of the departments and they weren't aware of this service being provided, but I didn't want to pursue any further because obviously it's there and it works. And this is a free service. Obviously there's services you can pay for that are out there. I'm sure people like Norgate would provide that service. It's obviously at a cost. There'll be others there too. So I can make this information available, but basically I can leave some notes somewhere. I can provide a document or some sort of a Word document with an embedded Excel sample of this, and with some notes on how to, some URIs such as these, and how to pull in data. Actually, that's what I wanted to show you. Yep, okay. So this information there is presented cleanly. You can read it nicely. The reason for that, I meant to mention this earlier. If I bring up IE, which is, where is it, here, and run the same query, I actually get different data. Same data, but not so well laid out. This is effectively the same information, but it hasn't been formatted accordingly. But it's the same data in JSON. And the reason why that looks like a bit like gobbledygook compared to this guy here in my Chrome browser is because I've told Chrome that this data is JSON format and please present it correctly. You get a plugin for Chrome to do that. So that's why that looks different to this, just for those that are curious. Any other questions?
Rick, it's Michael again.
Hey, Michael.
Is it possible to, say if you wanted to see the history of a stock and say, if you pick a time, say 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock each day, is that possible to bring up a history of that?
That would be possible, but based on the service provider. I'm guessing ASX will provide that information, but I need to ask them how that can be made available. So again, I mentioned before, my journey into this was finding just end of day data for my needs, but there are service providers out there that would have that information available, and that will be something like a URI with something like that, where you would be appended with something like a question mark and a time, date, field equals some Unix number which will represent Unix code in seconds. A service provider would have that, but I haven't come across that with the ASX. But having said that, I'm sure if we were to do a quick Googly Norgate API intraday. I'm just doing a guess here. Intraday. There you go. So I'm guessing Norgate, for example, would provide that sort of service. I'm guessing where you can get intraday data. Again, that's a paid for service.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the question we actually asked last night, that perhaps would be nice. I'm sure it would be available if all charts have information available. You would be able to extract that information out of the database in Bull charts if you stored that information. But I think only Bull charts only stores the end of day data from recollection, I'm not too sure. Nope. Okay. Well, thanks for your time. I can make this available to those that are interested. I can probably just tidy this up and probably remove, or keep it the way it is. Probably put some more documentation so you know what sections are relevant to modify. For example, as I mentioned before, a section like these guys here are pretty much relevant. That's obviously the URIs mentioned before. And this is where the information gets pasted into the active spreadsheet based on the fields in the return response from ASX. Okay, everyone, thank you for your time.
Rick, thank you kindly for doing that. That was really good. You went a bit smoother than last night, so that was good.
Thank you, Rick.
As we mentioned earlier, everyone, some of the material you've seen tonight, or all of it, we can make available. It's just a matter of Rick and I having a chat about how to do it and for me to put it somewhere. And I can let you all know over the next few days when we've got it and where to find it. So, again, Rick, thank you kindly. Now,
that's okay. Thanks, Robert.
I'll just take back control as a presenter and share my screen again. And Rick, you're welcome to stay for the next 15 or 20 minutes as we finish the session. That's not a problem.
Sure.
Yep. What we'll do is we'll continue on. I'll just rearrange my screen. I'm now showing the minutes from last night's meeting, and page 1 of those minutes has a brief summary of what we saw in the demonstration, and that's basically the same as what you've seen tonight. So the text that's there and the links might make more sense. So that minutes document is available on the internet in the usual place.